I don't know if there are any Magic the Gathering tweakers in my audience. It sort of feels like the same thing to me, in essence. They're both ways to give gambling addictions to math nerds and horny people. But I'm watching this crazy pit rack deck. I fucking love pit rack. I can't get enough of pit rack. It's so evil. I love watching people be subjected to it. Hello. Evil Fischl. This is why you should play Genshin loaded on a hard drive, because you get to see things like that. So first things first, to dispel any myths, her C6 is not necessary for her to be good. I'm a dumbass and I've been wasting my star glitter on wishes all these years, so I haven't gotten Fischl C6. I'm getting C5 next month, but I've only ever used her at C4 and below, and I still think she's busted. If you think that she sucks without her C6, then you're bad at the game, I'm sorry. But don't worry, I'm also bad at the game, so I'm here to save you. This 101 is probably going to be formatted a little differently because Fischl's kit is sort of simple. At a baseline, what most of you probably know her for is her skill, when you tap E, summons Oz, and then he will shoot at nearby enemies, deals some pretty nice damage, and he stays on field if you swap off. Her burst is pretty similar, it just turns her into Oz and lets her fly around before redeploying him. And that by itself is not bad damage at all. She acts as a pretty decent generic sub DPS, but that's far from all Fischl can do. Let's just take a moment to look at the only real part of her kit that I think needs further explanation is this one, her A4 passive. This is something that I talked about a lot in my Sethos video, and I'm gonna try to keep it a little shorter this time. This makes it so that whenever Oz is active, if your on-fielder triggers an electro reaction, he shoots an extra bolt of lightning, which you'll be able to see here if I swap back to Fischl. There we go. They look very similar to Auron's lightning bolts. They might be the same asset. It's not her C6, which is a misconception that I see pretty often. It's this that makes her so powerful. Because this skill, it deals 80% of her attack, but more notably, it has a 0.5 second cooldown. You can trigger it every half second, and every time it hits, it will apply electro, and therefore, react. There's kind of a joke that with every year that Genshin is out, Fischl gets a new buff, and the first big buff was Dendro with Aggravate. Before Dendro, there wasn't really a great need to apply a ton of electro, but after Dendro came out, and more notably Aggravate happened, a reaction that needed very little Dendro and can make use of basically as much electro as you throw at it, Fischl suddenly became a top tier sub DPS option, and Aggravate teams really all were just Fischl teams. This is, I guess, your kind of bog standard Fischl Aggravate team, where you have your carry, who is driving Fischl and is triggering electro reactions so she can actually be the real DPS. This one has Sethos. You could use Cyno, Kuching, Yaimiko, Kujo-Sara if you wanted, I don't know. You have your Dendro slot, who is often also your defensive slot, because it was only recently that we got Shilin in, because she is the first unit to have both Res Shred and defensive utility. But she certainly will not be the last. Even though Sethos is your on-fielder, Fischl is your main DPS. That's how good she is, even at C0. I guess I can take a moment to go over her constellations because they are relevant. This is stupid. Hoyo wants us to do some, like, dumb, on-fielding, physical, normal attack Fischl thing. I don't know what they're going for. C2 is actually a pretty large quality of life constellation. It boosts the damage and AoE of your Oz summon by a lot, like a very significant amount, and it makes it much better at like finishing off low health enemies and dealing with multiple small enemies, things like that. C3 is obviously pretty good, but it's not as good as you might think because, as stated, a lot of damage does come from her A4 passive, which that's always the same amount of damage. C4 is another quality of life thing, but I think it's less significant than C2. The healing is decent, but usually you have other defensive options on your teams. C5 sucks. C6 is very, very good, I will admit. Extending Oz's duration by 2 seconds is one really, really significant thing, but It also gives her coordinated attacks, which is just kind of overkill. I kind of like to think of it as before C6, she is worse than Xiangling, and after C6, she is better. That's a really, really reductive way to put it, and I might talk about that more in Xiangling's video, but this constellation raises her ceiling so goddamn much. So yeah, Fischl is busted case study number 1. Moving on to number 2. This one is pretty similar. She serves a pretty similar role, but this is just to show off that she can do the job no matter what it is. The second team is a little bit different. It's not quite so focused around Fischl. We do have aggravate happening with Emily applying Dendro and Cyno being a driver, but putting Toma into the mix, number 1, fills up our defensive slot, and number 2, enables Emily to deal a little bit of damage and also lets us benefit a little bit from overload damage. So this is a team where Fischl has literal anti-synergy with 2 of the units. She overtakes Emily's burning aura with overloads, and Cyno, Oz doesn't stay up for enough time for you to get his full field time out. Even with those things in mind, oh come on, I don't have enough energy recharge on my Cyno. Sorry guys. Even with those things in mind, Fischl is the best option in this slot. I don't even think it's close. Maybe you could use Beto. I wouldn't want to, I can tell you that. Even though Cyno is a completely different character who wants completely different things from Sethos, and he doesn't work as well with Fischl, she's still there because she's just that freaking good. I guess if I want to put it this way, the thesis of this video is that Fischl is flexible as hell. You can do so many things with her. You can build a whole team around her, or you can just toss her into an existing team and have her do her thing, deal some damage. And she'll probably be the best option either way. Rapidly moving on to case study number 3. This is, alright, that's number 4. I would like to do this one first. This third team is a bit of a weird one. It, again, is a bit of a Fischl driver team. It's a very untraditional one. Fischl as our main DPS, so she is in these teams. Baiju is our Dendro applier and defensive slot. Lynette is our res shred, as she's on VV in this team, which leaves Kazuha as our on-field driver. Kazuha's not on VV in this team. He's on Thundering Fury. When combined with the reactions of his burst, Thundering Fury lets him have a very low skill cooldown, sometimes as low as 4 or 3 seconds. I sort of like this team because Fischl is providing both the initial electro, so both Animo units can get their bursts absorbed, but she's also providing a payoff for them because they're triggering a lot of aggravates, and, you know, because Fischl has good enough raw output, you are able to infuse Lynette and Kazuha with electro damage. Lynette is your sort of traditional VV unit in this team, but because her burst infuses and then applies more electro, I like to use her as opposed to any other unit, and then her being on VV frees Kazuha up to holding Thundering Fury, which he then uses to get a lot of electro reactions and be an electro DPS. It's a little rough to play, and it is very, very sensitive to other auras coming in, especially Pyro. For those who don't know, there's actually a priority for how elements are infused by Animo units. For most of them, I say most of them because there's an exception and one of them's on this team, there's a pretty easy mnemonic device of THEC. THEC, which is Pyro, Hydro, Electro, Cryo. That means if there is Pyro on the field, then before any other element is infused, even if like there's Hydro or Cryo closer to you, if you hit that Pyro with your ability that infuses, you're gonna infuse Pyro. The 2 exceptions to that, Animo Traveler and Lynette. Weirdly enough, the 2 free-to-play Animo units. Their orders are the same, except Cryo, which is usually at the end, is moved to the front. Yet again, another team where you could use another unit that applies Electro. Notably, I think Yai Miko could actually be a decent option in this slot. Not because they're comparable. Don't make that mistake. They're not comparable. Yai Miko requires a lot of field time to do her real damage, and Actually, her best teams often have Fischl in them. And in a team like this, where you have some extra field time because Kazuha's cooldowns don't line up perfectly, Yaimiko could definitely be used, and I probably would use her if I had her. Alright, this is the last team that I've got set up here, and I'm gonna have to swap locations for this one. Because I know that I've said Fischl can do so many things and then shown off 3 aggravate teams, but they're 3 very different aggravate teams. What if I fought the bishops? Do they ever get close enough to like really be considered multi-target? This is really bad. I'm not gonna... In the very little talk that I've seen about Auron, I've seen a lot of people comparing him to Fischl, see, oh, well, how do they stack up against each other again in X, Y, and Z? And the general consensus is that Auron works better in content designed for him and in teams designed for him. Electrocharge, when he has his cons, he can deal more damage. But Fischl, she's going to be a character that you can use in a wider variety of teams, and she's a little easier to work in, but she doesn't have the same peaks as Auron. And I saw all that conversation, but for some reason no one brought up the fact that we had all this talk about Xingqiu and Yelan. We just play them in the same teams now. This is another situation where this isn't a particularly Fischl-oriented team, but because her conditions for high damage are so easy to meet, she becomes a best in slot. You just need to have time to swap into her at some point, really, during your rotation, and once every 10 to 12 seconds. And to a lesser extent, you need to be triggering electro reactions, which this team does plenty of. I've really been enjoying the Kazuha, Kokomi, Auron team core. I've been playing with it for a bit, and it is entirely possible that the Fischl variant is the highest damage variant, excluding, like, stupid stuff like C6 5 stars. The Fischl variant is proving to be very flexible, very high damage, and a lot of fun. Who would have guessed Fischl makes a flexible team? You can probably tell from, the fact that 3 or 4 out of these teams are quick swap that I like using her in quick swap because of this flexibility. Sethos doesn't on field for too long, neither does Kazuha or Lynette in this team, and same thing for this one. To me, at least, before C6, Fischl does feel like a somewhat frantic character. 10 seconds of uptime is not a lot. What's actually sort of interesting about this team is that of all the characters, Auron is the one throwing me off. Kokomi, Kazuha, and Fischl, they all have 10-second rotation kind of things that they have to refresh once during the rotation. Fischl has Oz, Kazuha has VV, and Kokomi has Jellyfish. Auron has his 1 15-second cooldown that is responsible for being able to generate Night Soul points for him. Last team on today's list is one that I'm going to make live because I didn't care enough to dedicate team slots to it. It's less of a Fischl thing and more of a chevreuse thing, but it's also a Fischl thing just because Fischl's good. This is the last thing that Fischl is incredibly good at doing. Take, Linny.
It's an honor to be here.
This is actually probably a very, very good Linny team. I haven't played this one before, but I'm going to give it a shot. I mean, you're placed with any pyro carry here. It obviously doesn't have to be Linny, but I think Linny's rotation might line up decently with Fischl because he can swap back and forth. So Chevreuse, of course, does her Chevreuse thing. Whenever your party has all Electro and Pyro units, if you hit an overload, that enemy's resistance will be shredded for however many seconds. And obviously, you need someone to be consistently triggering overloads for that. So Fischl acts as... stop doing that, man. Maybe I shouldn't have fought this guy with Linny. Fischl is absolutely perfect for Chevreuse teams, especially the heavily oriented Pyro ones. I suck. Yeah, that works reasonably well. I'm still getting high damage from Linny as long as I play him well. With someone like Hu Tao or Arlecchino or even Yoimiya, this would be a lot easier. She works well enough in these kind of teams to consistently trigger overload and get the res shred that you want. So she's not the best option, but she's a very easy to play, high damage option that meets the requirements. And because she's already dealing a decent chunk of talent damage, she benefits from that resistance shred that she's triggering. The only real finer detail of Fischl's kit is that Oz snapshots. To go it over quickly, snapshotting is basically when you use an ability that will persist while your character is off field. Think Oz, think Beto Burst, think Pyronado. Those are the only three that I can think of off the top of my head because they have actually stopped making abilities that snapshot. At the point that you're casting them, they will snapshot your character's stats, their elemental mastery, their attack, their crit, and the ability will deal damage based on those snapshotted stats for its entire duration. That's why Xiangling only needs to be on field to cast her burst. She gets Bennett's big attack buff, and then that will persist through the entire duration of the Pyronado. Oz is the same. He snapshots both when you cast him or when you resummon him. But while this damage, the talent damage, Oz's attack, this one does snapshot, the Undone Be Thy Sinful Hex, which is the Thundering Retribution, this doesn't snapshot. This dynamically changes with her stats. So while you can snapshot Oz, it is not necessary. This is that freak team that I can do now because I have Sara built. I know I mentioned before that snapshotting wasn't really important to Fischl's kit, but this is a case in which I'm trying to utilize that at least. This is admittedly a bit of a gimmick team. Kujo Sara is kind of weird and clunky. When she's C6, she can buff other characters using her skill, her charge shot, and her burst, meaning she can buff up to 3 different characters. The issue is that her buff doesn't last very long. It's only 6 seconds. But of course, Fischl snapshots, so she doesn't have to worry about that. Oz can hold that buff the entire time he's out. And while this is another aggravate team, it also technically could be an electrocharge team, or an overload team, or really whatever you want it to be. And in fact, maybe an overload team would be more fun. But the point is that Fischl can snapshot Sara's buff, and while Fischl's off field, Sara can do some things to buff herself, trigger some reactions, and deal some good damage. I kind of played that like dog. It works just because together Fischl and Kazuha do a lot of freaking damage, and Sara is doing something to buff that damage while doing significant damage herself. Look at that. I got him down almost to 0.
That's quite big. Impressive.
Got him. The rotations can certainly feel a little clunky, as Sara always does, because she's trying to buff Fischl at the same time as buffing herself. In the end, I don't know, I just think it's fun. I'm so sorry, I can't wish for you. I want C6 Fischl so bad. I know I wouldn't get it. I know I wouldn't get it. I need literally one Fischl con to get to C6 Fischl because she's in the Star Glitter shop next month. Should I do it for the content? I might do it for the content. Doing it for content. That was what, like 6 pity? I should do single pulls, but I'm not doing it. You should not do this. This is stupid lucky. This is ridiculously lucky. I should not have gotten this. I do not condone doing that. I'm gonna have C6 Fischl. After all these years, I'm gonna finally have C6 Fischl. It's because of my own stupidity. I definitely could have gone way further with that gambling Oh yeah, I also forgot to record this yesterday. I do have her other outfit, but I use her base outfit because it's better. Hey guys, hope you like this one. Overall, Fischl is a pretty simple unit, and it's pretty clear to see why she's good. She's a unit with a strong floor and an incredibly high ceiling, and I really love experimenting with her. If you like this one, you can leave a like. If you like me, you can subscribe. I hope you have a lovely day, and if your Fischl is unbuilt, you should change that. Also, you should start buying units in the Star Glitter shop.